Welcome to Trending Update USA. This is Stefan and I am glad you're with us today as we dive deep into Coco Gauff's Australian Open journey and the forehand that says everything about her tennis, her growth, her resilience, and the future she is still actively shaping on the biggest stages of the sport. When Coco Gauff walks onto a court at the Australian Open, there is an unmistakable sense that something larger than a single match is unfolding. Melbourne has become a kind of proving ground for her, not just because of the heat, the hostile rallies, or the unforgiving nature of hard courts, but because it demands clarity. It demands decisions under pressure. And perhaps more than anywhere else, it exposes technical truths. For Gauff, no shot reveals more about who she is as a player than her forehand. It has been questioned, dissected, defended, rebuilt, and ultimately embraced as part of her identity. At this Australian Open, the forehand did not just show up as a stroke, it spoke loudly about where Coco Gauff is in her career and where she is heading next. Gauff arrived in Melbourne carrying the weight that now naturally follows her. She is no longer the wide-eyed prodigy shocking the world with fearless runs. She is a Grand Slam champion, a top-tier contender, and a player everyone prepares for with specific game plans. The Australian Open is often brutal in this respect because early rounds can be deceptive. Opponents hit freely, the courts play fast, and the pressure is squarely on the favorite. For Gauff, the opening matches were about control. Not dominance for the sake of highlight reels, but control of patterns, tempo, and most importantly, her forehand mechanics under stress. From the first few rounds, it was clear that Gauff was not trying to hide anything. She was not slicing her way out of rallies unnecessarily or overprotecting one wing. Instead, she leaned into her forehand with a calmness that suggested acceptance. This is crucial. For years, the narrative around Gauff's forehand has been framed as a liability, something opponents could target endlessly. But tennis careers are not shaped by erasing imperfections, they are shaped by managing them intelligently. At this Australian Open, Gauff's forehand became a symbol of maturity rather than vulnerability. Technically, the forehand still carries its unique characteristics. The backswing remains compact but not rushed, the grip still leans toward control rather than raw flattening power, and the follow-through is designed to give her margin over the net. What changed in Melbourne was not the existence of the forehand's quirks, but the confidence behind it. Gauff committed to her patterns. She trusted the shot cross-court to establish rallies and used the inside-out forehand selectively rather than forcing it. This tactical discipline reduced errors and allowed her athleticism and court coverage to shine. Australian Open courts reward players who can absorb pace and redirect it, and Gauff excels at this when she is patient. Her forehand, when used as a rally stabilizer instead of a finishing weapon, allowed her to neutralize aggressive opponents. This was especially visible in matches where rivals tried to rush her, stepping inside the baseline to pressure that wing. Gauff responded not by panicking, but by adjusting height and spin, pushing opponents back and reclaiming the center of the court. That ability to problem-solve mid-match is what separates elite contenders from talented hitters. Mentally, the forehand story is even more revealing. Tennis is ruthless in how it exposes doubt. One shaky service game or one missed forehand can unravel a player's belief. In Melbourne, Gauff showed a refusal to spiral. Missed forehands did not lead to immediate overcorrections. Instead, she reset, trusted her footwork, and continued to swing with conviction. This calm response under pressure tells us that Gauff now understands her game at a deeper level. She knows that perfection is not required to win matches at the highest level. Resilience is. Another important layer to Gauff's Australian Open campaign was her movement into the forehand. For a long time, critics pointed out that when she was late, the forehand could break down. In Melbourne, her anticipation improved noticeably. She positioned herself earlier, giving her more time to set up and strike the ball cleanly. This small adjustment had a massive impact. It reduced rush swings and allowed her to use her legs more effectively, generating depth even when she wasn't going for outright winners. The Australian Open also highlighted how Gauff's forehand fits within her broader tactical ecosystem. Her backhand remains one of the most reliable shots on tour, and her serve has become a genuine weapon. This means opponents cannot simply camp on the forehand side without consequences. When they overcommit, Gauff finds angles, changes direction, and opens the court. Her forehand doesn't need to dominate. It just needs to hold its ground long enough for her other strengths to take over. And in Melbourne, that balance was on full display. As the tournament progressed and the stakes rose, the forehand became a litmus test for Gauff's championship mindset. In tighter moments, she did not shy away from using it. She didn't default to defensive slices or bail out of rallies prematurely. Instead, she accepted that errors are part of aggression and that winning tennis at the Australian Open requires courage. That courage, more than any technical tweak, is what her forehand now represents. There were rallies where the forehand produced clean winners, moments that reminded everyone of Gauff's explosive potential. But more importantly, there were long exchanges where the forehand simply stayed solid, absorbing pressure and keeping her in the point. Those rallies wore opponents down mentally. When rivals realize that a once-targeted weakness is no longer yielding cheap points, frustration creeps in. At that point, matches begin to tilt in Gauff's favor, not through flash, but through inevitability. The Australian Open is also a tournament that tests physical endurance. Matches can stretch deep into the night, and the heat demands efficiency. Gauff's forehand mechanics, while not textbook in the traditional sense, are efficient for her body. She conserves energy by avoiding excessive wrist manipulation and relying on her core and legs. Over the course of long matches, this efficiency becomes an advantage. It allows her to maintain consistency late in sets when fatigue often exposes technical flaws in others. Beyond the technical and physical aspects, Gauff's forehand tells a broader story about her relationship with expectations. Early in her career, every forehand miss felt magnified, as if it confirmed a flaw that needed urgent fixing. Now, at the Australian Open, those misses are treated as data, not drama. This shift in perspective is essential for longevity. Great players evolve not by chasing perfection, but by building trust in their process. Gauff's forehand embodies that trust. The crowd in Melbourne responded to this evolution. Australian Open fans are knowledgeable and appreciative of grit. They recognize when a player is competing honestly, embracing challenges rather than avoiding them. Gauff's willingness to stand in rallies, to take the ball early when needed, and to defend her forehand under fire earned her respect. That energy fed back into her performance, creating a positive loop of confidence and composure. From a developmental standpoint, this Australian Open could mark a turning point. Not because Gauff suddenly transformed her forehand into the most feared shot on tour, but because she redefined its role in her game. It is no longer a talking point of weakness, it is a functional, reliable component of a well-rounded arsenal. That shift changes how future opponents will approach her, and it changes how Gauff herself will approach high-pressure moments. Looking ahead, the lessons from Melbourne will carry into the rest of the season. Hard courts demand honesty, and the Australian Open provided Gauff with clear feedback. Her forehand, when supported by strong movement and smart shot selection, is more than enough to compete for titles. Continued refinement will come, but the foundation is now solid. This gives her freedom. Freedom to play aggressively when the moment calls for it, and freedom to defend patiently when needed. Coco Gauff's Australian Open was not just about wins and losses. It was about narrative evolution. It was about showing that growth in tennis is often subtle, visible not in dramatic overhauls but in quiet confidence. Her forehand, once a symbol of unfinished business, now speaks of acceptance, discipline, and belief. It says that Coco Gauff understands her game, trusts her work, and is prepared to keep evolving without losing herself in the noise. As this Australian Open fades into memory, the image that remains is not a single highlight or a single statistic. It is the sight of Gauff stepping into her forehand without hesitation, even when the pressure was highest. That simple act says everything about her tennis right now. It says she is no longer running from expectations or imperfections. She is standing in them, swinging freely, and letting her game speak for itself. For Trending Update USA, this is Stefan, and Coco Gauff's Australian Open reminds us that in tennis, as in life, progress is not always about fixing what's broken, but about learning how to trust what you already have while continuing to grow.